Archaeologist with the Bureau of Land Management. This is my partner, Dennis Sight. We are giving a presentation tonight called Holes in the Hills, the Archaeology of Abandoned Mines. This is actually part of a month-long celebration that the state of Oregon has called the Oregon Archaeology Celebration, something that happens every year. Basically, it's just a celebration of our cultural heritage, which if you've grown up in this area or lived here for very long, you understand that mining is a very important part of our history, and that it's still an active part of our community here. Since we are involved with the Abandoned Mines program, the archaeology that we happen to be involved with is with mining. So this presentation is given just to highlight some of the interesting and important parts of our history in that regard, and to emphasize how you can enjoy that history out in the field. It's still all around us out in the woods if you get a chance to get out there and see it. You want to add anything else?
No, I think that's good.
Okay.
Okay. I wanted to give you just a brief intro on why we're doing this. We are the Abandoned Mine Lands Unit. What we're doing is remediating the hazardous things out there. Primarily, we're looking at the shafts. It's safety, physical safety, and environmental hazards are the things we're trying to fix. Mostly on this district, we get the vertical shafts and the adits are the most dangerous things. We don't have a lot of acid mine drainage. Actually, you guys look like a lot of miners. You might know more about that than me. Again, the focus is on hard rock mines. Sorry. I need to be looking at the screen to do this, but I want to try to talk to you folks. We're focusing on abandoned hard rock mines. We're not really dealing with any kind of placer mining. We're doing underground and open pit stuff. And actually, we don't do a lot of open pit here either. Just because there's not a lot of it, there's not a lot of hazards associated with that stuff. We did started 2 years ago with 2 crews. And we did about 18 months of field work, went out and looking for the mines. We recorded 427 mines, all told. Recorded about, 1,766 features. The better part of those are underground openings, and about 150 of those are associated mills, things like that, building structures, ponds. One thing that we didn't say at the beginning is please feel free to chime in anytime and keep it open.
How do you know they're abandoned?
That's a tricky question.
There's a lot of 30-day claims.
Sure. The definition of an abandoned mine, according to, go back a slide.
Yep.
There's the, I don't even remember the number right now, the 3720 section of the BLM manual defines, quote unquote, an abandoned mine as one that hasn't been worked since 1981 when the 3809 laws went into effect.
I got another little question.
Okay.
Once you stake a mining claim, it becomes public domain land. That takes it totally out of the Forest Service or BLM authority. So how can BLM be into closing up mines?
I don't deal with that. And
well,
if you don't mind, can we move on? We want to do the history. I'm just giving you a brief rundown on, on why we're doing this stuff.
We are both archaeologists. We're not part of the mineral program. We're not geologists. BLM does have people that are trained to answer those specific questions.
Why aren't they here?
I would because this is the Oregon Archaeology Celebration, sir.
That's the reason we're doing this, is to celebrate archaeology.
To talk about the archaeological and historical aspects of mining in this area.
Are you celebrating things that should be left open?
You're asking questions that it's above my pay grade to ask, to answer, excuse me.
We have many questions tonight, sir.
Will the geospatial database become open at some point to the public?
It will be. I think so. But honestly, again, I just make the stuff. Other people do it.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the gentleman up front when he said, when you're talking about how abandoned mines, and you mentioned how many, could you identify how you come to the conclusion of an abandoned mine and how you categorize them or date them or whatever you do?
It depends. We'll get into some of that when we go into the archaeology in just a minute. Again, we wanted to introduce why we're doing it at the beginning. An abandoned mine, according to the BLM abandoned mine land policy, is anything that has not been mined since 1981. I know these guys, your guys are familiar with 3809? Yeah. I'm sure you are. And again, that's about as much as I know about it. For an archaeological site on federal land, it's anything that's over 50 years old. Did you get that?
Yeah, it has to be over 50 years old to be abandoned.
No. 1981 is abandoned. Over 50 years old is archaeological site.
Can you define what that means, archaeological site instead of a geological site?
It's coming up, you bet. This right here is an overlay of two different things. The pink dots on this one right here are something you guys, maybe a lot of you folks are familiar with, which is the milo, the mineral industry layer that comes out of Ogami. The blue ones are mines that we have recorded. You can see that, and most of you guys will know this, I assume, is that the areas where nothing's covered is most of the Forest Service, and we're working for the BLM, so we haven't covered those areas.
A lot of money.
There's, as near as we've been able to guesstimate so far, there's at least 600 known mines on BLM lands in the Medford district. This is not the state of Oregon, this is just the Medford district, as you can see. Based on the data we currently have, there are at least twice that number of mines, 2 times that many more mines on Forest Service and private lands outside of BLM administered lands.
This is just a quick thing we put together to show you all the different things that we end up getting into being in the AML. When you do this, there's obviously all the different things with NEPA and with the National Historic Preservation Act. And of course then the minerals as well. We are doing right now cultural resource preservation. That's what we came here to talk to you guys about, is that we do want to preserve these. We're not out to destroy them or anything like that. I promise you that. As a matter of fact, we have to follow the laws of the government to preserve these things. What we're doing right now is going through and evaluating them. Are you familiar with the National Historic Preservation Act?
No.
Okay, I won't go into it then. It's not a big deal. We have to evaluate them as to whether or not they're eligible for the National Register of Historic Places.
Well, if it is, you can't find it.
That's not true.
Okay, you said it's comparable level there. There's many historic sites that's already been destroyed by BLM before you even stood here and said this. So how can you come and say you want to restore a historical site that's been already destroyed? I can tell you now.
The National Historic Preservation Act.
Jesus Christ, these only got destroyed a year ago.
It was put into effect in 1966. There was a lot of things, almost everything in fact, if something was in the way of a project.
1963, I believe, was the time under the desegregation bill.
And it was amended in
And it
66.
was under disguise of racial intentions, and also they hid under keeping away the others.
Appreciate that. But anyhow, the intent of that law is to take into consideration the effect of any action by a federal agency on historic resources. Now, they hire people like us, archaeologists, to go out and evaluate when something is going to have an effect. When we go to a lot of these sites, there may be something, that you say, well, that's historic, that's older than 50 years, but what we're interested in is it significant or not? I run into other archaeologists that might make the case, well, a pile of tin cans, that's historic, so we can't log here, you can't mine here. No, that's not the intent of the law. You can look at the pile of tin cans and determine that's a pile of trash. And it may be old trash, but it's still a pile of trash. So, in order to evaluate something, we go through a process of looking at the integrity of it. So, for example, we'll show some examples tonight. If there's a mill structure, for example, that's still standing from a stamp mill, that's got some structural integrity to it. If we can track down a historical background for that site where we can really reconstruct the history and know when the claim was located, look at the chain of title and who it passed through over time. We can discuss, try and pinpoint, what different high points of its production history were. If we can then go to the national criteria, which are things like, was this significant in U.S. history? Not just local history, was it significant in U.S. history? Was there a particular person, somebody that was well known or played a significant role in U.S. history that we can tie it to? Does it have value for the public? In other words, is it someplace that the public can actually enjoy and learn something from about our history? We look at all those things and make an evaluation then professionally and say, okay, this meets X number of criteria to fit the National Register of Historic Places. And if it doesn't, then it goes into another category. Then it's something where we say, okay, it's not historic, and maybe we need to manage it and preserve it somehow, but it's not significant at that particular level. Other cases we might say, yeah, this is just recent stuff, or it's something that we don't have any history for, and it's really not significant to U.S. history. We've got other examples of things that are going to give us a representative sample of what is significant for our history here locally. And BLM will move on and say, okay, we can, that can dump, we don't need to be concerned about that. We can move ahead with this project. That cabin, guess what? That can be torn down because it's just recent. So it's a long process, and it's a detailed process that we go through. But I think the system works if we're allowed to do it. Yes, sir.
Are they going to come in on public domain where there is say an old cabin and something, and the history really goes back a long ways, and it's already claimed up and it's being worked? According to all the mine laws I've read, it's private property, public domain.
Look, folks, hold on. Nothing personal, guys. We really don't want to get into this. This is not for us to do. We don't do these things. These things come about, they go to other people. And we don't have the pay grade for this, let alone, we're not geologists, we're not in the program. We're not here to answer those questions. We're here to show you about the cool stuff we found.
As much as I would love to talk about it, I really don't know the answer to. You got to talk to somebody that is in the mineral program.
We already know where it is.
Well,
that's good. You can help us to understand it.
Actually, yeah.
You don't want me out there.
Go ahead.
Here, let me show you something.
Is the BLM abandoned
Take a look at the pictures.
lands program a research program, or is it part of a land management program?
Some of these are hiding the very place he said you're preserving for us to go see. Excuse me?
Can you repeat your question?
To repeat, the program that you're discussing tonight, the BLM abandoned mine lands.
We're just giving you an introduction to that.
Is it a research program, or is it part of a land management program?
It's part of a land management program. It's a national
What's the name of
BLM
that
policy.
program?
Go back to the slide, please. There's this handbook that you can find online. Go back right here. This is the Abandoned Mine Land Program Policy Handbook. You can find this online and figure out where from the national level we've been mandated to do what we're doing right now with the abandoned mine land. We got fortunate enough to be able to do the history and stuff as well. This project is funding the fact that we're doing all this preservation. Please understand us in that and help us.
Was that stimulus money?
I have a question about the preservation. I read something in the paper, and now it's due on Sunday, about pouring some kind of foam into the...
Yes, ma'am. We're going to talk about that later. Excuse me?
Doesn't that conflict with preservation? Because
it doesn't. We actually met with the State Historic Preservation Officer, who we have to consult with to do this, and he thinks that what we're doing is a great thing, actually.
I'd like to see you finish it, actually.
So would we.
Go ahead.
Yeah, let's keep going here. So,
Well, I do have one question. Just so we're on the right page here. Are you guys actually BLM employees, or are you guys contractors?
We're BLM employees.
Okay, so you guys are actually BLM archaeologists attached to the agency, opposed to somebody from,
Yes.
say, OSU or somebody like that. Okay, that's what I was wondering.
That's correct.
okay, let's move on.
What we wanted to talk about is archaeological sites, and again, I've already defined them, and you guys know this as well as I do. It's just the mine. We look at the cans and some of the other associated things that you guys probably don't care about, but again, it's the artifacts, features, and structures that are cited. Features we tend to use for the added shafts, you know, test pits, prospects, and all that stuff, but anyways, and that's what makes up a site. We wanted to make sure that we defined that. We didn't last night when we did this program, and maybe we should have.
All right, so I'll give my disclaimer, which I gave last night, which is that we've got a mixed audience. So some of you obviously have been around mines or been involved in mining, so you understand the terminology, you understand the processes. There's a lot of people in the public that they've got no connection with that history whatsoever. Particularly people that are new to the area. They may not be familiar with the history here, like some of us that have grown up here, been born and raised here. And so this is necessarily going to be at a certain level that can reach everybody. And I'll just offer my apologies in advance if I'm speaking below you in your understanding of mining. So these questions, you know, when you're out in the woods, a lot of times say you're hunting, you're out hiking, whatever, you may come across an old mine. And if you're not familiar with mining, or even if you are, there may be a series of questions that run through your mind. First of all, you know, that you may be wondering, well, when was this worked? When were people mining here? You may be wondering why they were actually digging in that spot, what type of commodity they were looking for. Surprisingly, I get a lot of people asking, well, how did they dig these holes in the ground? That's a mystery for some people. You may even wonder, okay, is there still something valuable here? Would it still be worth my time to actually prospect here or go poke around? And is it safe to actually go in this mine? So those are questions that the average person may run through their mind when they come across something like this. But the first part of them are actually questions that archaeologists, when we're trying to reconstruct the history of a site just from scratch, they're questions that we go through and try to work out the answers to through research also. And so we're just going to kind of go through those this evening and use that as a template to address some of the history and archaeology of mining in this area. So the first question, when did they mine here? We've actually got a handout that we'll pass around. I'm not going to spend too much time. This is just kind of a quick timeline of different highlights in Oregon mining history up to World War II. The reason we do it up to World War II is because most of the standard treatments of mining really put an emphasis on the effect of War Production Board Order L208 when it stopped gold mining. And most of the mining historians that usually mention the fact that mining really, and particularly gold mining, never really recovered to the extent that it was after that until you move ahead in time up into the, at least nationally, into the late 80s and 90s when you had some introduction of new technology and gold mining obviously picked up. And certainly with the recent increases in the price of gold, there's been renewed interest in mining for gold as well. Yes?
On that history there, you have a jump between a 1928 to 31 depression era.
Yeah.
Okay, and then you jump from there to 1942 and forward. What happened to what our Governor Martin did in 1935, from 35 to 37, when he created Dogami and Josephine County was thriving in gold production?
This was not intended to give you a detailed history, just because I tried last night in our presentation to go through and really give a detailed history of it, and we ended up running out of time.
Well, so, it's a good reference point, Governor Martin.
Yeah. So, and I will say that yeah, there definitely are gaps in here, and certainly when you look at the history, at least in our area, mining was thriving. Not just in that 28 to 31. That's really when it picked up, and especially 34 and 35. all the way up until L208 put a stop to gold mining. Most of the mining historians that you look at, they said that it was ready to really take off again on the eve of World War II. So, yeah, that's, you're right in noticing that there is a gap
Well,
there.
one more thing too.
Yes,
In
sir.
that period of time, the first vocational training school was created here in the city of Grants Pass, which Theodore Roosevelt gave a grant to the city of Grants Pass to produce a mining school. And that came about, and there was over 1,100 people went to that school.
Mm-hmm.
And you would think those are good reference points that BLM would have towards this.
You would be surprised at the shoddiness of the historical record with mining. And it's not just in the government. It's even in private sources. It really is pretty spotty when you try and go back and do research. Now that's one reason we actually like to get the chance to talk to people that have had claims on mines for a long time, because a lot of times you may have a chain of title that goes back that even research at the courthouse, which you're familiar with, you may not be able to turn something up there. So, we'll talk about that again in a moment. Just that there is a difficulty in trying to track down the history of individual mines and mining history in general. Yes, ma'am.
The reference to what that gentleman just said in the first there, it seems like that was what he's hearing is that was a very significant point in the Grand Path. I'm just kind of perplexed and surprised at such a significant time when gold mining was really exploding here, and as you said, 1,100 students in a mining school. And I'm just perplexed why such a significant thing would be overlooked.
No, it wasn't. I'm aware of it. I know what he's talking about. Yeah. Yeah, no, all I was saying was this was just to give a brief outline. And again, please keep in mind that the average person is not going to be like Michael and know that history. Most people are unfamiliar even that mining was an important part of the area.
Wouldn't that be a good point to bring up then?
So, in a more detailed treatment, which I would love to teach a semester-long class on the archaeology of mining, and we could go into all that kind of stuff. I think that would be a great opportunity. So, again, and just keeping along the same theme, that we're just giving a quick overview of mining history, and please don't take these periods as anything particularly significant. When you're talking about mining history, you've got to come up with some kind of a classification scheme to periodize things. This is what the State Historic Preservation Office actually uses for their periods, but obviously there were a lot of significant events occurring in mining in this area within those big chunks of time. So, they would group the 19th century together, 1849 to 1900. Well, think about all the different things that were occurring in mining in this area. There's some discussion as to where the first strike was. A lot of the popular sources would say, oh, it was in Jacksonville. Well, if you study the history, that's probably not accurate. You've got good documentation that mining began in Waldo and Kirby and places in Josephine County before it started in Jacksonville. But the sources conflict. When you get back to the earliest historical sources, you've got people's names change. It seems like they were trying to hide their identity sometimes, and everybody wants to have the claim to, yeah, we had the first strike here. So that's something that we, as historians, we try and evaluate that and figure out, if we can, and if we had time and we're so inclined, you could probably write a dissertation on that, but we don't. We're government archaeologists, and that's not our job. It's simply to try and record the facts in a general fashion. You've got placer mining, really had its heyday from 1849 to 1860. Most of the historians point out that the major sources, the easy pickings, really is what you should emphasize there, were played out by around 1858 to 1860, and the people that had come with the rush, they then went ahead and moved on to other places such as the Fraser River up north, and the Chinese miners came in and ended up taking over a lot of those claims and reworking them. It doesn't mean there wasn't gold there. Obviously there was still a lot of gold there still is, but they had to use more industrialized methods such as hydraulicking to actually extract the gold. Something that's interesting that we've been discovering in our research, the earliest lode mining Most people again will point to the find of Immigrant Graham or Sonora Hicks around 1860 as the earliest lode mines. And our historian, who couldn't be here tonight, Dwayne Erickson, he's been looking in papers down in Southern California at the time, newspapers in Sacramento and elsewhere, that actually carried columns about mining across the whole West Coast. And he's actually figured out that no, there were lode mining, underground mining, as early as 1854. The miners, they were smart people. They once the gold was running out in the streams, they started going up the banks and the hills trying to find the sources of it. And these early newspaper accounts point out that in Althouse, Jacksonville, and the Galice area, you've already got underground mining in that early period. So that's something that you're not going to find in really in any history book that we've seen so far, that our research has actually been paying off, and we'll change things a little bit. Between 1865 to 1900, then you've got an industrialization of mining that took place, and that's again, if you're in mining, you understand that it is an industry. There's a process involved in extracting the gold and beneficiating it and getting it ready to sell. But the average person, they're probably not going to realize that gold mining and just mining in general is industry, and that it actually involved industrial processes with huge machinery and lots of people working in mines, and that it was big business. So that really kind of characterizes that phase up to 1900. After the turn of the century and through World War I, just kind of, again, we're just talking in generalities here, but the first decade was really marked by the ascendance of lode mining. So the placer mining began to be surpassed, for example, in Galice, the Galice area between, I want to say, around 1890 through about 1914. Lode mining became much more important in the Galice area than placer mining was. And that's really saying something. When you go out there and you look at, for example, the old channel gravels that are out there, you go to the old channel mine, you see how much gravel they moved out there. It's just physically impressive, the amount of work that was put into that mine, and yet lode mining, underground mining, was even outpacing that in terms of production during that period. The second decade, the 19 teens and actually up until about 1930, you started to see multiple recessions. For example, there was I wouldn't even call it a recession. There was really a depression associated with World War I, and that really caused the industry, in particular gold mining, to tank at that time. And you go back and you read some of the early histories, and they talk about how mining almost died during that time. They say, at one point there was only, I think, four mines that were actually operating in this area, and which is really impressive when you consider the fact that how many mines we have here historically. Yes, sir.
A lot of that was because of lots of capital from the 1907 bank collapse.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. There was if you look at the economics of it, there's actually a whole bunch of spikes and drops during that time, and it's really complex. There's all kinds of things going on.
Capital and the banks were flooding.
Yeah, and it's what was I going to say? Oh, we'll go on. So, but yeah, that is a good point. Oh, that reminds me. But the other thing I was going to say was that something to remember too is when one part of the mining market might have tanked, say for gold, for example, other commodities would be spiking, and so that's something we'll just I'll show a slide briefly a little bit later. But for example, chromite production during World War I, World War II, Korea, chromite production spiked, whereas World War II is the best example. You've got L208 shuts down gold mining, but a lot of miners turned to chromite mining during that time. The Depression era, 30 to 42, you had a boom that was marked by subsistence mining and reworking of old claims, and there were still some big mines that were operating, things that we would call, if we're trying to classify them and put them in types, things we would call commercial mines. There was a few of them, but for the most part, actually one of those really important ones, the Bunker Hill mine, which is out in Y'all's neck of the woods. So but in general, across the whole United States, mining during this period, and we're no different here, mining during this period was marked by subsistence mining. It was small-scale mining. People who had lost their jobs because of the Depression, they realized they could go out and they could make a living and support their family out of the mining field. Mining is it's still one of the only places where you can actually go and create wealth from the ground. That's a key characteristic of that period. Post World War II to the present, you've got some interesting things that happen. You had spikes in commodities such as chromite and mercury. Chromite I already mentioned. Mercury is pretty interesting if you want to study the history of that, because it's even though some of these other things will be affected by the economics here in the United States, mercury was impacted mostly by things happening outside of the United States. The main producers of mercury from cinnabar in the world are Italy and Spain. That's where the largest mines are for those commodities. And so, depending on what they would call the Italian-Spanish cartel, the mercury cartel, depending on what they were doing with prices, kind of determined how our mercury market fared, and it affected people's livelihood here in this area. Let's see. We've got kind of which I mentioned before, a general decline of the industry following World War II, and primarily small-scale mining that's in this area. Again, if you look nationally in places like Nevada, for example, when you get to the mid to late 80s, early 90s, you get some changes in technology. You start seeing pit mining and things really take off, and gold actually ramps up at that point. So that's just mining periods, mining history here in Southern Oregon in a nutshell. And so when you're looking at mines, obviously you're going to have to do the research on an individual mine to try and figure out when somebody mined there. But if you've got kind of a framework in your head, you may be able to fit it into one of those periods pretty quickly from some of the things you're seeing on the ground. The impact of Oregon mining from 1850 to 1965. This is from Dr. Libby, state geologist. 1965, he states this. I think it's a good quote because it emphasizes the importance of mining for this area. And you can read it for yourself. I'm not going to take the time to read through it completely, but basically mining is why we've got settlements here. It's why Europeans and Chinese and a whole bunch of other different people that we'll see in a moment migrated to this area was because of gold. They came here, and that's because of gold. That's why we had schools developed. That's why we had institutions of law developed here. So mining was very important in the formation of this area. Somebody want to answer that? They don't want to answer. But even though it was so important in the history of this area,
telephone.
There we go.
Even though it was so important in the history of this area,
Hey, hello, Mom.
something that's important to point out, in 1965, it was already a token of its past. And again, that's not to say that there's not mining still here. You all know there's still mining going on here, and it's still important for a lot of people in our community. But it certainly, when you compare it to the past and the fact that it was this industrialized thing where everybody's economy, regardless of what you were doing, was somehow tied to mining, it definitely has faded, and it's unlikely that we are going to see that again. Like
At that time, there was the last gold study being done in the state of Oregon by Dogami, and that's not the whole part of that statement that you got up there. They actually did an actual investigation for the whole state of Oregon on gold by itself.
61, yeah.
Okay.
Gold and silver in Oregon.
And then the person that was in charge went off to be with the Department of Interior that made that statement and investigation. Hollis I think was his name, Doyle.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, he was encouraging, that was the last time Dogami ever helped the miner, was in the, up to 69 when they did that study. And then 70 became the environmental direction. But you know, when you just use pieces of this, it doesn't look like, you know, the industry was dead in the 60s, and it wasn't here, realistically. There was
No, that's, and maybe I didn't put a strong enough point on that, but yeah, it's you know, mining was not dead here. It's
never died.
It has not died. There's still, you know, I grew up in a family that, I grew up here, we mined when I was a kid. You know, so I've grown up in that, I understand that. But if you need to look at the nuance of what I think he was trying to communicate when he's talking about how important mining was to the overall economy of this area. It founded towns, it started schools, it helped government get organized. You know, you look at it now, and our economy is not, you know, you might want to argue it with economists, but you know, a whole bunch of economists are going to tell you we're not based on mining anymore.
It's getting closer.
Well, that's a separate question, which I agree. Yeah, maybe we should dialogue about that. But you know, that's just the statement.
I'm just about exact history myself first.
Yeah, like I said, if I had my druthers, we'd do a whole semester-long thing and be here every night talking about this stuff. Yes, sir.
I just wanted to point out what you have in your own statistics up there, but if you look at the estimate in today's record highs, you're talking $18.5 billion in products that came out of this southwestern Oregon region. If you look at that and you put it to economies of scale, there are no other industries that we have anywhere from Eugene south that come even close to even $1 billion in revenue source. And I don't understand, as an archaeologist, why the archaeological significance of these sites are now being looked at since that law came into effect in 1966. What happened between 1966 and 2011 that made this such a high priority in areas of resource significance like we have here in southwestern Oregon? Because our timber's been affected, the watershed's being affected because of the Clean Water Act, now the decommissioning of roadways and mines. I mean, something seems a little suspicious here, since it's like us going to Saudi Arabia and saying, you know what, look, we found a bunch of archaeological findings here, and you're going to have to find something else to live on besides oil. When we've got a refrigerator full of food in our backyard here, and we're starving our communities. And I'm just asking that question, that as an archaeologist, don't you see a little bit of controversy?
I understand where you're coming from. Okay. I think there might be an assumption in there, which is, we're doing the archaeology now somehow to close that down, and I want to dispel that. No, that's not why I'm doing the archaeology. As far as me personally, I grew up here. I've been here since 1972. I can tell you that from 1978 on, when my family was mining, I've been interested in mining history, and I knew while growing up I was going to be an archaeologist, and this is one of the things I was interested in. So. It's not that it has just actually become important. We'll actually talk about that in a minute. Okay. What some of the reasons are why mines have been ignored by archaeologists, because they have been. That's you're picking up on something there for sure. And there are some fundamental reasons for that, and I'll get to them in just a minute. Yes, ma'am.
Can I address that just a little bit better? No, look at this from the point of the fact that we have the abandoned mine land program is the reason that we get to preserve the mines. We're not trying to shut them down or to get rid of anything you guys have. We have an opportunity to do a whole bunch of in-depth field work and then the subsequent historical research to back that up and make reports. It's actually going to go into the history books someday. I hope we're making it better, if that makes sense.
The lady in the back.
Okay. I just got the impression that maybe what you were sharing is that mining has decreased in the industry because we've got all these other industries, and I think I just don't want to see any disingenuousness, and I'm sure there isn't any on your part, sir, but to connect the dots of why mining has kind of lost its either value or the industry isn't as predominant as you say, because I think a lot of people in this community, from what I've gathered and what I knew, is that it's a lot of because of the environmentalists that are moving into a lot of other industries where they can't build hospitals because of an endangered rat or a bunch of stuff. So as you look at the environmentalists and other things, I think there's been a discouragement. I mean, I think the passion for miners, what I found, they had a lot of passion. for mining and working really hard. They don't mind putting in an 18-hour day at a blink. But they see they're so discouraged from seeing all the regulations and other people interfering and closing down roads that it is statistically, you are correct, that there is a slowdown in the industry, but I just think you need to be more honest on why the slowdown in the industry exists.
You're getting into the why part of it, which I, in this capacity, I'm not going to get into that. Yes, sir.
Yeah, at the same time, it's perfectly understandable when you're throwing into perspective the pricing manipulation that's rolled by the government. Something that labor versus $20 an ounce, labor versus $1,800 an ounce, you got different.
You're stating the facts. Yeah, you go to any mining history and then they will share that with you. That's a big element of it for sure. Michael, I think you had a question, and then we need to keep moving here.
Well, I was just going to say, I just don't understand what preserving these sites have to do with putting a bat door on so the bats can create colonies inside there. I mean, if you're going to close them up, you close them up. Why do you are designing this to create habitat?
We're not actually.
I mean, not you personally, but I mean.
No. And even the program is not doing that. But that's again, we're getting a little bit off into the AML program, which unfortunately we're not here to discuss. We're going to talk about.
Okay. Well, the reason why I mentioned it is because a friend of mine just got a letter from BLM that they have to put a bat door on the Benton mine so the bats can go inside the mine and not be disturbed. So I mean.
That's something you would need to talk up with AML program lead, with mineral program, and they would address further what exactly was occurring in that instance. But yeah, I can't tell you one way or the other about it right now. Yes, ma'am.
I know it's probably not within your purview or your pay grade, but is there a chance we can get the AML people here to speak up directly?
Tonight, no.
No, not
but,
tonight, but soon.
But I would encourage everybody, if you've got questions, please contact the office here. But yeah, that's what I'm saying. If you're interested in doing something like that, contact the office, contact the manager, and let them know that you would be interested in knowing what's going on.
Do you have a number that I don't get a recording on when I call?
You should be able to call the front office and get a receptionist.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. We kind of hit on this already, but I'll just glance over that again. That is just a rough estimate of the number of mines. This is documented mines. So that's something else we're finding in our research. There's all kinds of stuff where prospectors went out and dug holes in the ground and mined for a little bit and moved on and left it. And that's another part of our history that never has been written about. And so through our research, we've been able to record some of that stuff and kind of add a page to the history books, which I think is worth mentioning. In terms of the environmental impact, it's everybody kind of gets up in arms about this, and you look at the history of this area, and certainly there were types of mining, mainly hydraulic mining, that it had an impact on the landscape. I mean, but you got to think about it, by definition, right? Mining is going to have an impact on the landscape. That's what mining does, and the bigger the pay chute that's discovered, the more development that takes place, the bigger the impact it's going to have on the landscape. That's just what mining is by its nature.
It does stop forest fires.
What's that?
It does stop forest fires.
A lot of our roads are built exactly that way. I-5 probably was right there, I don't know.
So, but yeah, you look at this, I mean, it's there's not mining going on this scale today. Hydraulic mining, this is actually a shot of the Sterling mine. I think this is around 1890-ish. You can see they've got the big spotlights here. They had it set up so they could literally work around the clock while they had water to operate this thing. For anybody that doesn't know how hydraulic mining worked, you've got the Sterling ditch, which actually supplied water and gave them pressure for their giants to spray the bank. But in this case, you see they also had some ground sluicing going on. That's what the water coming off of the top is. And then all of the slurry, the gravels would come down into the sluice box, and that's where the gold was recovered at. You go out today and all over, I'll get John. all over the landscape, you're still going to see aspects of this mining. It's everywhere. It's, you know, this is over in the Galice area. Actually, both these shots are in the Galice area. You've got tailings from workings along the creek. You've got these high banks where they were doing hydraulic like that.
Yeah, but
Yes,
it
sir.
reinforced itself and actually healed itself over time.
It's you know, you look at this, yeah, it's one thing you can see for sure is that the environment bounces back. Now, having said that, there are some moonscapes out there because of the scale of the mining that took place. You know, there's some places we go out and there's not anything growing on it 100 years later. And that tends to be what people focus on, but there's a lot of, you know, most of the places we've seen are like this. But again, we're focused on underground mining. We're not really dealing a lot with placer mining, so this is usually stuff that we just kind of see as we're passing through, getting to the underground mines. As far as underground mining go, what kind of effect does that have on the environment? In general, most of the stuff that we've seen, there is not a big impact. In fact, a lot of these places that we go to that are abandoned, you know, that's part of why I called this presentation Holes in the Hills, because it's kind of an idyllic setting. You're walking through the woods and it looks like a pristine environment, and then there's a hole in the mountain. And that's the only thing, the only trace of it that we actually see on the ground is just a hole in the hillside. There's no garbage, there's not anything. That doesn't mean that there are not instances of things where it has been degrading to the environment. And I will admit right up front that these are some of the more extreme. I put them in there just to make the point that there are instances of this. But you know, sometimes you will find where people have been dumping on their claim and they haven't cleaned up. They haven't done the reclamation after they're done mining it, and so that creates a problem. People living in a place and then they leave their cars in the trailer, and you know, then it becomes target practice for teenage boys. So yes.
That junk, all that junk and trash that's right there is gold.
You can go out and
you can go out and make a good living off of that.
Right.
At $400 a car now.
That's, we need to encourage the people that were doing this to clean up their junk and go scrap it.
Call me. I'll go get it.
And there was some miners, that young men who got their claim, and they got their Ford pickup truck, and they were cleaning up such debris, and BLM arrested them for taking artifacts. Excuse me, there's something amok there.
There's, you know, you bring up an interesting issue, and part of the issue is that is a claimant going to disturb a recorded archaeological site, which that will bring about an issue.
It's not very pretty archaeologically.
Well, no, see, I'm not saying these are archaeological sites either. This is just recent stuff that somebody.
I'd be able to turn that motor into a stranger.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, I actually think we've pinned down who left all this stuff there, and we're gonna ask them to clean it up. In the back.
If you establish these sites, then you classify these sites. Are these old mining sites going to fall under the Antiquities Act? And you protect them for the average person can't step foot on it?
No. It's again, I'm wishing we had time to really get into depth on this stuff. But if it is a recorded archaeological site, yes, archaeological laws are going to apply to the things that you know, for example, if it's one of these sites that I said, we've done all of our evaluation and we've established that it is eligible for the National Register. It's a recorded archaeological site, eligible for the National Register. Let's say there's a historic stamp mill there. Then, yes, that is going to fall under Archaeological Resource Protection Acts. But you got to look. You get into. I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not in the minerals program. I can't comment on that stuff. But you're getting into an area where you really have to dig into the laws and start looking at which laws cover which. The archaeological resources may be protected, but that's not going to impede somebody from going and extracting minerals from the ground. They can't go and haul off the stamp mill for scrap because that's been considered to be an archaeological resource, and it's historically protected and it's significant for all of our culture, all of our history. You know, so yeah, in that case, those laws are going to come to bear on that.
So if that archaeological site setting on a major high-grade pay street, it can't be disturbed.
You're getting into stuff that the minerals part that I really don't know. So it's, you know, there's cases out there, I'm sure, that have dealt with just those issues. And, you know, when I've got time and get paid to do it, I will probably want to look some of that up because I'm curious about it too. Yes, sir.
Terrence, are any of your bosses here tonight that could answer any of those type of questions? Because I think Abby Josie is one of the people in the BLM here that actually deals with those issues every day. I was just wondering if she could address that, because you said there wasn't anybody here that could.
No, I didn't say that. I said I can answer. So, if you're addressing questions, please.
No, I was just wondering if Abby would mind.
We've repeatedly tried to say we're making a presentation about archaeology tonight, celebration of World Archaeology Month. Laws or development tools and regulations. These guys really just want to share with you the interesting things that they found out on the ground while they're doing the inventories for the environment program. Before we decide whether we're going to plug a hole or do anything like that, we have to document all this stuff and go through and then we move on to whether or not it can be altered on the ground. But
She's the one who likes that stuff too.
Is once you've documented an archaeological site on the ground and it's nationally eligible, all of those things does not prevent somebody who has a valid mining claim from developing that claim under the proper rules, regulations, and procedures. I worked in Nevada for a lot of years, and there are open pit gold mines that completely demolished entire towns, relocated sites as mitigation for developing those mines. So it does not prevent in and of itself a mine from being developed. That's the short answer. That's all I really want to address because I want to hear the rest of this.
Yeah, we do need to get on. Please let me take the question from the gentleman in the back because he's been patiently waiting for about 5 minutes here.
You're more or less dealing with the load mining.
Yeah, that's really, once in a while we're looking at placer, but say that again?
The old mill site?
The old mill sites, yes, sir.
Some of these mines have a centralized mill site, and they either use mercury, which is bad, and they use cyanide. And if you've been around these mill sites, you should know this. You know, as an archaeological person, you should know it. Those things, those chemicals are still active.
They are, and I am very much aware of that.
It's kind of interesting to me that, you know, we're doing this environmental impact stuff, and we have the super fund and all this other stuff going on, and are they going to address these hazards? I mean, these are hazards, folks. These are big hazards. For your children, my children. It's probably a presentation if you let us do it. I guess.
Who worked the mines? You know, threw a bunch of big topics on here, but you look at in trying to answer that question, who was working a given mine, there's a lot of things involved in that, the impacts that mines had on people, on where people lived at, the numbers of people that were here, the ethnic groups that were here. So all of those things kind of get covered in this. Just in general, you know, most people when they ask that question of who worked the mines, they're more interested in the ethnicity of people. From the history books, we've got African, Chinese, Cornish, French, German, Greek, Hawaiian, Irish, Italian, Jewish, Mexican, Native American, and probably a whole bunch more different ethnic groups that were involved in mining here. That's not a real big surprise. Mining reflected the diversity of our country at the time. Even people groups, ethnic groups that wanted to segregate themselves because gold is where you find it, because it's, you know, resources are in a particular area. It brought people groups together in close proximity to one another, and in ways that really didn't happen back in the East Coast. You can see that this is actually a picture from California, but it's one of my favorite pictures I come across. You've got the European miners, you've got the Chinese miners, both working their separate sides of the sluice box there. In terms of the population, you know, the main effect of mining, especially early on, that 1849 to 1860 period, mining created a transience in the population. Obviously, there was conflict with the Native American groups that were here. For example, on Galice Creek, that's just in the history books. There was conflict, and because of that, the Native American groups were dispersed over to Siletz. You had a rapid increase and decrease of new population groups. You know, so there's stories about on Galice Creek when the Big Yank lode, where the Almeida mine is at now, when that was first discovered and located, there was a rush on it, and it happened to be during the winter. You had a rush of you know, maybe as much as 6,000 people come up from California to that area, and so Galice, which had some mining obviously before that, there were some small camps. Suddenly there's hotels, there's saloons, there's all kinds of stuff being built at Galice. It lasted for less than a year, and then the rush moved on, and they just left furniture and everything. So it was kind of a you know, a byword amongst miners that if you needed furniture, go out to Galice, because there was still stuff sitting out there that you could just go collect for free. As far as gender goes, there was a general increase in the number of families, even though most of the miners were single men in their teens and 20s. In general, you saw an increase in families during that time. There was an unequal gender ratio. There was not a lot of women in the area. You can see that from this photo. This is actually from northeastern Oregon, so they've got a really great collection, if you haven't found it online, at the Baker County Library. They've got historic photos of mining that area, and the reason I use it here is just because it helps to illustrate the point. But you can see you've got, what, 10 plus guys there, and you've got 2 women at the mining camp. That doesn't mean there weren't women here, but a lot of times, you know, if women, wives of miners came out, they would stay in town. They would have a house in Jacksonville or someplace like that, or in Grants Pass, and the men would be out working at the camp, and that's just how they lived. In terms of the establishment of population centers, you can really say that really every town, city, settlement we've got in this area of southwestern Oregon was either directly or indirectly founded because of mining. So even someplace like Ashland, where you know, most people don't think of Ashland as a mining center. Actually, you know, there's a ton of mines in the hills around Ashland, but there's not mining going on in Ashland itself. But it was mining that supported a lot of the population in Ashland. In fact, Ashland, citizens of Ashland were some of the biggest backers for the mining boom that took place in Galice, which is kind of an interesting fact. Same thing with Medford. Medford, obviously there's not mines in Medford itself. The mines are out in the hills. But Medford grew up as a commerce and transport center based on mining, and then when the railroad came through and you had orchards and other things, it kind of took on a life of its own. I just show this really quick. The red areas are historic mining areas in southwestern Oregon. You got Jackson County, Josephine County, Douglas, Coos Creek. The little yellow points actually went through and tried to map out where all the ghost towns and historic settlements were, and just kind of see how those fell in relation to historic mining areas. And as you can see, there's a number of them that are found within these mining areas. And if you go back and try and research the history on those little towns, these are places that, you know, a lot of times nowadays there's nothing there, like Buncombe. You go to Buncombe, there's some old shacks and the old post office and stuff, but there's not really any people living at Buncombe. Yes, ma'am.
On all these, that's a lot of, that's a big area of historic mines. Are these mines that even though they're identified as being historic mines, they can be
Can people still make claims on them? Sure.
And have mining claims on them?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and we'll get to that in a minute. But yeah, there's you know, we've met a lot of miners doing this job that we go out to look for a mine in a particular place, and we find, oh, there's somebody's got a claim here and they're working it.
But they don't have to go through a lot of layers of...
That's the regular mining laws apply to that, so, and how you stake a claim. Yes? Any other questions? Okay, we'll keep moving here. Actually, go back to that, just highlight a couple more things. We kind of already hit on this, but the effect of mining kind of long term, when you look at it, at the historic trajectory, how it affects a region like this, southwestern Oregon, you get that process of industrialization that starts to take place as claims are found and as they begin to be developed. It leads to institutionalization. You start getting schools, you start getting government organizations established, and then it leads to incorporation. You actually get a settlement is established, and so that really has led to the places where we're living today. Last but not least, you had a subversion of Eastern class hierarchies and social mores. So, you know, you compare the West Coast and the frontier to what life was like on the East Coast, there was very different things going on. The Wild West mentality was very much alive here in southwestern Oregon. You look at the history of Browntown, for example. It's got all the things you would expect to find in a, you know, gunfighters and gamblers and prostitutes and everything else. It's very colorful history. We had all of that. A lot of the early historians, they'll note though that they had these loose morals during boom times, and then once the rush was over and people moved on, they said that the colorful crowd kind of left town, and the people that were left were a little bit more socially acceptable, and so you get a kind of a reformed morals during the bust periods, according to the earliest historians. Also for women, there was different social opportunities for women back east. Again, it was very rigid for in terms of upward social mobility for women. But out here, women could own mines, and there's you know, we had some discussion last night actually with some of the folks at the presentation talking about, you know, how did women acquire mines. Sometimes it was prostitutes that gained a portion of a mine because of miners gambling. Sometimes women inherited mines from their husbands who were miners, and then we've got evidence of stories of women that just outright came in and they purchased mines on their own.
As long as they wasn't Chinese.
So, what's that?
As long as they wasn't Chinese.
That's another interesting thing with the ethnicity. You know, you've got all these people in close proximity, but something that's really fascinating is history is that a lot of the mining districts actually had their laws, their bylaws written up, and you can still go find copies of those and read them. And there were some of them that were very open, and you know, anybody was welcome to mine there, and just as long as you followed the rules as far as who got the water. Other mining districts, you know, they would set up things like out on Humbug Creek. They said there was no Chinese miners allowed there, and you know, it was just kind of the best thing I can compare it to is kind of a neighborhood association, except that in this case people would shoot each other if they didn't get along. They didn't stick pink flamingos in their yard. So why did they mine in a particular spot? What were they mining for? How did they dig the holes? This is going to be old hand for a lot of folks here. But, you know, just try and think through the eye of somebody that's not familiar with mining, and, you know, say somebody that's just moved here and doesn't even know that mining was an important part of our history. They go out along the Rogue River here, and they look across, and somebody already recognized this. It's the Alameda mine. You know, just as you've gone through Belize, there's a little turnout there. It's a nice spot where you can look out and see across the river. And people look at this, and some people, you know, I've watched people when I've been out there. You know, some people's reaction is, "Oh, what an eyesore! What the heck is that?" And other people are kind of wondering what happened there. But just looking at that today, as an average person, it would probably be pretty hard to imagine, unless you've got some knowledge of mining, that was actually what was sitting out there at one point in time. And so part of our job as archaeologists attached to the Abandoned Mines Unit is that, you know, we encounter, most of the sites we encounter are going to be things like this. It's just holes in the ground. It's just piles of waste rock, tailings, and so there's kind of a little bit of detective work that's involved in trying to piece together the history. And hopefully, if we do our job right, we're able to reconstruct in our mind's eye and for the history books what used to be out there, and that allows us then to make that evaluation to determine, was this something that was significant for our history, or is this something that it was just run of the mill. We'll come back to Alameda in a minute. So, in terms of the sites that we're encountering, they've got some typical features. Just like placer mining has got its own language and technology and stuff that was used, underground mining, lode mining has got its own language and technology. Typical features, it might be surprising, but a lot of people don't know. In fact, a lot of people will tell me, oh, I went into a mine shaft today. Well, I'm thinking, you went into a mine shaft? and most people know, they're just talking about a tunnel. Or an adit, really, would be the technical term. So, for those who are not familiar with it, an adit, the old-time miners also refer to them as tunnels. It's a horizontal working that's driven. It's got one opening, which is called a portal. Technically, a tunnel would actually have openings on both ends, like a train tunnel. You go in one, you can come out the other. But the old-time miners, they referred to adits as adits or tunnels, either one. Sometimes they would refer to them more technically as crosscuts or drifts. I'm not going to get into that here. But you've got vertical shafts. You've also got incline shafts, such as this. Then underground, coming off of shafts, you've got drifts and things of that nature. The whole purpose of the underground workings was to get to an ore body, was to get to your pay chute and to develop it, to block out your ore so that you could process it. And it was a very industrialized and orderly process. When when you're looking at these mines, you can actually tell which ones had a professional mining engineer involved with the operations and which ones were just kind of your average Joe that was just picking in the dirt. All of them, everybody, you get a little time, everybody can play around with explosives. But you can see a difference in the quality of the work as these are developed historically. In terms of surface features, we'll find tailings, waste rock piles, heaps, whatever you want to call them. They call them tips in Britain. It's interesting because they tip the carts. But it's tailings, you've got trenches, pits. You have a whole bunch of associated structures, mill buildings. You've got the head frames over a shaft. You've got ore bins and chutes. You've got the machinery. Just a point on machinery, I'll bring it up here again in a minute, but typically we don't find machinery out there anymore. That's been scrapped out because somebody knew they could make some money off of it. So most of the time we'll just find the foundations, the concrete foundations where the machines were mounted, and we've got to kind of reconstruct what was there based on that. Yes, sir?
Most of that machinery went out to World War II scrap yards.
Yeah, you're exactly right.
That was where it was done in, as the mines were done because of L208.
Yep.
Old machinery because they were on railroads.
The places where we find the machinery, it's the stuff that was so remote they couldn't get it out for World War II, or it's stuff that was worked after World War II, and somebody they weren't making money and they didn't want to take the time to haul it out, and they just left it and moved on. You've also got support structures is something else that we typically find at these sites: cabins, shops, sheds, things of that nature. So, what kind of stuff do you see? Part of our job is again reconstructing the industry, the process of the mining that was taking place at these sites based on the equipment, based on the remains that we're finding. In terms of some of the equipment, and again, this is not typical of the stuff we find. We're showing you the cool stuff just because it's still out there. Just anecdotally, I'll offer, I grew up here. My family was involved in mining. When I was a kid, we could drive 20 minutes outside of the valley, Rogue Valley proper, and you'd have stamp mills and all kinds of stuff still standing out there. And you go out now and you got to go for a couple hours really to get out to some of these places to see some of the stuff still standing. So even during the time we've done this project, a lot of these structures have actually been vandalized. There's places where we had some historic cabins, and I reported them a year ago. Went back recently to monitor it and to make a map, and somebody burned down the cabin and
U.S. Forest Service at work again.
It wasn't Forest Service. So stuff is disappearing, and it's important now. I think that we're getting a chance to record some of it while it's still there, and actually while we still got people that do mining and know about mining to give us some of the history on it. This is an arastra. If you don't know what an arastra is, it's a crushing machine to break up the ore. You would have had drag stones in here. This was either powered by water or by a gas engine. The drag stones would have turned around. You would have placed your ore in the bottom here, and it would have been crushed up. And then they had mercury, and they had in the base of it so that the gold would attach to the mercury, and that would get drained off out the other side over here to a bin, and that's where they would extract the gold. This is an unusual piece of equipment. Dennis, why don't you share about this?
Actually, I'd like to ask some of you guys about that. Have you guys seen any one of these before? We found one on the district. It's a Griffin mill. This is a pretty unique piece of equipment. It's called a centrifugal mill, and you know, I think it's a secondary processing or a pocket processing machine. I don't know, but anyways, it's well, you can see it. This one is remote, and so they got it in there with mules. I can tell you that right now. There's never been an automobile where this happened right here. But it actually, we don't know if they worked this one by water or steam because there wasn't enough left at the mill there to figure out how they were running it. But it did run off, obviously, the big wide belts that they used, and you can't quite see it. Back in the corner over here is a transmission, I call it, for this machine that was about the size of a V8 engine. It had a whole bunch of gears on that, and you can see that it was part of the drive mechanism. But anyways, the shaft didn't actually rotate. What it did is it oscillated in a circle around the pan right here and ground the fines right here, and the bottom here worked essentially like an arraster, except for this part here was the grinding part. They ground around the end, and then there's your chute in here, and there would be another draw chute to take the ore out.
So is that grinding around the face of that pendulum?
Yeah, on this pan right here. This is the grinding pan right here.
Yeah, so this here.
It'd be like a pulverizer, wouldn't it?
That's, yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of our thinking as well. That's not something you use for your primary crusher.
I would think it would have to be. You couldn't put a lot of ore through that thing at all.
High grade.
Well, that's what I said, or your pocket, yeah.
What, crush the nuggets?
So this even something this was pretty remote. Normally we don't find whole equipment like this. Even when we do find equipment, usually we'll just find parts of it. And we end up going back through patents and trying to identify parts of equipment and see if we can identify what machinery that was used out on that spot was. Because it's so remote, you still got the whole thing here. There was a Pelton wheel used on this site, and one of the old miners out there that we spoke with, he said that the Pelton wheel had been hauled off by helicopter by somebody that's pulled it out. So even this is vulnerable to getting hauled off.
So what mine was that?
I can't tell you.
Oh, really?
I don't want you to go out and get it.
So.
They're gonna presume it, but you gotta find it.
Yes, sir.
Can I ask for the process now? So you find this machine on some BLM claim, right?
This one actually isn't a claim, but yeah.
So recording that, right?
Yes.
For historical reasons?
Yes.
So that does stop mining on that claim? Like an Indian?
No, that's been asked a few times. I think you can.
Yeah, I didn't get it, so I wanted to.
No, it does not stop mining on that.
Okay, so it's just a recording issue.
We're recording it, yeah, for the archaeological.
It's not like you find an Indian site where everything stops.
Well, I think what you're thinking of is if a burial ground is under.
Right.
You got a whole other set of laws that apply to something like that.
Okay.
NAGPRA.
So it's not comparable.
This is not like that, no.
Okay.
Well, that's how that started with this.
Let's speak to that just for a minute. Please understand that what we're doing is following the American government's laws so we can do the abandoned mine land stuff. That's really what we're doing. That's why they hired archaeologists to find these things, because they knew that we would be able to address the National Historic Preservation Act. That's why they hired archaeologists to do this. They figured we could find them pretty good too, because we're good at running around in the hills and finding them. But that's why we got hired to do it, is to address the laws that have to be taken care of before the actual AML people can do their thing.
And what about if a person is lucky enough to have something like this on their claim? Somebody gonna come in and try to say that this is ours, and
it's illegal by the archaeological ARPA, Resource Protection Act.
Well, no, I think what he's asking is BLM can come in and say, this is ours. If it's again, I think I addressed that earlier, but if it's a recorded archaeological site, let's say you had a stamp mill that's on your claim, then those laws are going to apply to that.
But technically you cannot. If you look in the mining laws, I believe it does address this and say that you have to, when you go through a site, you have to follow all local and federal laws, and these actually do apply to you guys. Don't get me wrong, I'm not telling you can't mine. For the most part, you guys get exceptions to do pretty much all the extraction that you want. Okay? Now, I don't know a lot about this, so I don't really want to get into it, but I will tell you that much. And there's a lot of other people that you can contact at the BLM. Please do and ask these questions. They'll be happy to talk to you.
get into square nails, that's where you want to be.
But see, that was the same thing with the Indian side. It started out to be the burial sites, and now you got a problem if there is a marking on a rock. I mean, that's what we're asking here. Where is this going? That's the whole main question, I think, for everybody. Where is this going?
We know where
You
that's
know, you're recording these things. Is it going to stay with the law it is now, or is it going to evolve into
What was the name of that?
preservation?
Again, I want to
Let's
stick
not
with
tell 'em.
what we're talking about here. I will say this, if you've got questions, contact your BLM office. You know, there's managing people that are paid to answer questions like that. More importantly, just kind of my personal advice, you know, you're getting into questions about big laws. This is not just Medford BLM. You're talking about laws that were established by the United States, by the Congress of the United States. If you're concerned about it, I'd start talking to your senators. Get in their ear and let them know what you're concerned about, because that's where the change is going to take place. It's not guys like us.
It is. It's see where it's cut
like I
out.
said, I grew up, I'm this. We're just out there recording.
Okay.
Can I take that home?
Can you take the snail mill home?
I'd love
It's
to have
pretty
it.
cool, huh? This is, there's not a whole lot of these left on the district. When I was a kid, there was a lot of these out there in the countryside. You're going to be pretty hard pressed to find something like this nowadays. I'm willing to bet within 3 to 5 years this is going to be completely collapsed. And, you know, there's not a lot you can do about it. In fact, we're doing the best thing we could do, which is to record it. And basically there's kind of a principle which is preservation by recordation. We're going out and recording it, and that's the best way we can preserve it for posterity, is simply to take these photos, take the measurements, do the history on it, say this is where it came from, this is what it was used for, and that's the end of it. It's going to fall apart. That's just nature. Yes, sir.
What about making it run again? Somebody's cut a chunk out of that.
You know, they actually did that. The Gold Hill Museum went up to the Lucky Bart mine. There was a stamp mill that was standing out there for a long time. It was still there when I was a kid, actually. And they hauled that in to the museum in Gold Hill, and they set it up. And they actually had it running for a while. And then people that knew how to run it, I think some of them passed on, but it kind of fell into disrepair. And they're actually making plans now to come in and refurbish that again and try and get it running again.
It's actually never ran.
The one at the Gold Hill?
That one's never actually ran. I've got a...
The lady was telling me that they were running at one point, so...
They tried. They didn't quite get it there.
Okay. That's good to know. So, but, yeah, in case you don't understand what a stamp mill is, it's a very ancient type of machinery. Stamp milling, the history of stamp milling goes all the way back to ancient China, thousands of years ago. The Romans write about stamp milling. The technology itself actually came from the old world. The people that were familiar with mining methods in Germany and for example in England, the Cornish miners, when they came to North America, they brought the technology with them on the East Coast, and it just gradually made its way out here. Most of the stamp milling machinery that we would find historically, let me change that back. Sorry, the computer was about to time out there. Most of the stamp milling machinery that we would find was actually manufactured in California. This was manufactured in San Francisco at Joshua Henry Iron Works. Some of the mine carts we find were, most of them were manufactured in Stockton at the Globe Iron Works in Stockton, California. We haven't found anything like this yet, but historically the earliest stamp mills that we read about were actually manufactured in England and shipped all the way around the Horn or carted on wagons across country. So there was, you see how big this is? That's me standing in the scale there. Just the incredible amount of labor, not only that went into the physical working of the mines, the driving of the adits, the cutting the trails into these remote places, but setting up this machinery and operating it and maintaining it is just a testament to the strength of the people that live in this country.
That mine there is still under claim.
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is.
Yep. And when we're reconstructing the process and what was happening in a mine, a lot of people wonder, they see a hole in the ground and you automatically think, oh, they're mining gold here. Well, obviously, no, that's not the case. There was all kinds of minerals that people were mining here. And so, for us, it's usually we've done enough background research that we're aware of what the commodities were when we're going to a mine. But let's say we come across something that we just stumble across a hole in the ground that we weren't expecting to find, and we want to start piecing together what were they looking for here. We've got geologists on staff. and they've helped us with that too, to be able to identify the pertinent minerals. If you can't identify it on the ground, one thing you can look at is the type of milling machinery that was being used. Because as many of you are well aware, different minerals require a different process in order to make them salable. And so in this case, if we found a retort like this, a D-tube type retort, that's a dead giveaway that you've got mercury mining going on rather than gold mining or chromite or some other commodity. Yes.
Part of this abandoned mine program, wasn't there a